No, we can no longer continue with the same approaches that have been proposed until now, due to the risk of seeing our country gradually and inevitably disappear. That's why we have decided to intervene and take responsibility.
Every time a coup happens, someone makes millions. While soldiers are firing shots, private jets are taking off. While the news talk about chaos, contracts worth billions quietly change hands. The real question isn't who rules after coup, it's who cashes in. Picture a soldier at the gate of a presidential palace at dawn. Behind him, the city is silent, radio stations are off air, and citizens wake up to a familiar announcement. The government has been dissolved.
Il faut qu'on le fasse tous ensemble.
For most of the world, this is a story of politics, ideology, or power. But for those watching closely, it is something else entirely. A coup isn't just about who rules, it's about who profits. Take Mali in 2020. Within hours of the junta's declaration, gold prices reacted, investors shifted money, and international contractors began redrawing their maps. In Sudan, when the generals turned their gun inward, global wheat futures spiked because Sudan sits on a critical trade route. And in Niger, a sudden cutoff of uranium sent energy companies scrambling. What looks like chaos in the street is, in financial terms, a series of transactions where winners and losers are being decided in real time. And here's the paradox. We tend to see coup as a national tragedy, but the market sees them as opportunities. When a president is toppled, aid contracts don't just vanish, they are renegotiated. Sanctions don't just punish, they create new black market premiums. When the border closes, smugglers doubles their rates. In other words, every coup is also an economic reset, and money always finds its way to those positioned to take advantage. And yet, the ordinary citizens rarely makes it to the list of winners. Nurses in Khartoum still queue for diesels. Farmers in Bamako still face fertilizer shortages. Traders in Niamey still watches the CFA franc wobble, while the headlines shows parades of generals on TV. The real story is buried in ledgers, shipping manifests, and commodity reports. So the question is, when the dust settles, who actually gets paid? And why does every coup, no matter how bloody or chaotic, seems to make sense when you follow the money? By the end of this video, we will map out the hidden business model of a coup, from security contractors and commodity traders to sanctions, smugglers, and policymakers. Because behind every falling flag, there is a balance sheet. To see how we got here, we need to go back a few decades. Because coups in West Africa aren't random explosions of events. They follow patterns. Cycle of debts, resources, and external influence that primes a country for a sudden collapse. Let's start in the 1960s. Most of these countries gained independence around that time. Niger from France in 1960, Mali also in 1960, Guinea had broken up earlier in 1958, famously rejecting de Gaulle's offer to remain within the French Union. Sudan shook off British-Egyptian rule in 1956, and almost immediately, their political life became intertwined with pressures of Cold War geopolitics. Military elites found themselves not just as guardians of sovereignty, but as brokers of aids and contracts. By the 1970s, the template was set. Soldiers with guns could rewrite national budgets overnight. Sudan had coup in 1969, Guinea in 1984, Mali in 1968, Niger in 1974. And each of these coups triggered the same chain reaction. Foreign partners paused aid, commodity exports stumbled, then resumed under new contracts. This was the silent incentive structure. Instability hurt citizens but create bargaining leverage for those at the top. Now, fast forward to the 1990s and the early 2000s. Structural adjustment programs from the IMF and World Bank reshaped these economies. Government privatized assets, liberalized trades, and opened doors for foreign mining companies. Gold became Mali's lifeline, uranium defined Niger, Guinea leaned on bauxite, and Sudan split between oil and agriculture. When a coup struck, those sectors were the first bargaining chips on the table. The 2010s brought a new layer, global competition for resources. China's Belt and Road Initiative meant billions in loans and infrastructure projects across Africa. The US and EU doubled down on counter-terrorism funding, particularly as jihadist groups conveniently spread through the Sahel. Suddenly, a coup wasn't just a domestic affair. It could decide whether a road contract went to Beijing or Paris, or whether military aid came from Washington or Moscow. That brings us to the recent waves. Since 2020, West Africa has seen more coup than any other region. Mali in 2020 and 2021, Guinea in 2021, Sudan in 2021 and again in 2023 with internal clashes, and Niger in 2023. 4 countries, 5 coups in less than 4 years. That's not a coincidence. It's a trend. And the pattern is striking. After Mali's 2020 coup, France froze security cooperations, but the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary contractors, moved in. After Guinea's 2021 coup, bauxite export dipped briefly but quickly resumed because global demand for aluminium was too high to allow full cut-off. After Niger's 2023 coup, uranium contracts became the center of attention in Europe, since Niger supplies nearly 25% of EU's uranium. So the background is this: coups are no longer isolated national dramas. There are mechanisms inside a global economic system. They redirect contract, shifted commodity flow, and reallocate aid budgets. That's why every general who seizes power issued almost the same promise: stability. Stability reassures external partners. Stability keeps commodity moving. But let's pause and underline one paradox. While coups have increased in frequency, citizens' well-being has not. According to the UNDP, countries in the Sahel now host some of the fastest displaced population in the world. Food insecurity doubled in Mali and Niger between 2020 and 2023, even as gold and uranium export continued. The economy moves, but ordinary people don't see the benefits. This is the setup. Coups are embedded in a half-century of external dependence, resource politics, and shifting alliances. They are less about ideology, socialism versus capitalism, democracy versus autocracy, and more about who gets to broker the national asset at any given time. So far, we have seen the historical beats: independence, the coup template of the 1970s, the IMF reforms of the 1990s, the resource scramble of 2010s, and the new wave since 2020. Each step has made coup not just possible, but profitable. Next, we will narrow down to a single case study, one coup, one country, to see chapter by chapter exactly how money moved when the government fall. Because to understand the business model of a coup, you have to follow the cash flow in real time. To understand how coup turned into a business model, we need to zoom into one specific country, Sudan. Because Sudan didn't just have one coup, it had 2, back to back, in 2019 and in 2021. And in those 2 years, you can see the entire economic choreography of a modern coup: the fall, the scramble, the sanctions, the re-entry, and the quiet deals that follows. It all started with this guy, Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir was a dictator who ruled Sudan for 30 years. His regime thrived on divide and rule, crushing rebellions in Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile. However, by the mid-2000s, Bashir's grip was slipping. International sanctions were strangling his economy. Oil revenues collapsed when South Sudan seceded in 2011, and his armies were stretched thin. So he needed new source of wealth, and fast. And that's when he turned to this guy, Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti. You see, Hemeti wasn't a politician. He wasn't even a general in the traditional sense. He was a warlord, head of the feared Janjaweed militias, famous for their brutality in Darfur. And instead of crushing him, al-Bashir thought he could tame Hemeti. He folded the Janjaweed into a new force, the Rapid Support Force, the RSF, and gave them uniforms, weapons, and salaries. And for a while, it worked. The RSF crushed rebellions, intimidated rivals, and shot up al-Bashir's power. For al-Bashir, this was a gamble, formalizing a militia outside the army. But for Hemeti, it was an entry ticket into state power. Also, Hemeti brought with him more than just men with guns. He brought gold. Darfur was sitting on some of Africa's richest gold deposits, and Hemeti's family took control of mines in Jebel Ammar and beyond. By the late 2010s, the RSF wasn't just a militia, it was a business empire. Following years of protest, the Sudanese armed force, led by General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, finally toppled al-Bashir in 2019. And Hemeti, who was brought in to consolidate al-Bashir's power, turned his back on him. To the people, it looked like liberation, but that betrayal opened a dangerous new chapter in Sudan's history. The army under General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan and RSF under Hemeti became uneasy partners. Together, they promised a democratic transition, even swore in a civilian government. But within months, Burhan staged another coup, sidelining the civilian government. At first, Hemeti stood by him, but cracks appeared almost immediately. Burhan wanted to consolidate the military under one chain of command. That means absorbing the RSF into the national army. For Hemeti, this was an existential threat. He wasn't about to give up his private military or his independent gold empire. By April 2023, the fragile alliance between Burhan and Hemeti snapped. When Burhan pushed again to merge the RSF into the army, Hemeti refused, and what followed was full-scale war. The RSF quickly seized large parts of Khartoum and Darfur. The army held on to Port Sudan and air bases. The country fractured. Now Sudan has two rival centers of power, the army with its institutions, tanks and air force, and the RSF, a paramilitary that had no business rivaling a national army, and yet somehow it did. So here's the real question: how could a warlord, a man who once headed camels, build a force powerful enough to face down the Sudanese state itself? The answer is money, and in Sudan, money means gold. After South Sudan broke away in 2011, Sudan lost most of its oil reserve. The economy collapsed. But in Darfur, new deposits of gold were found. Hemeti and his family moved fast. He used the RSF to seize control of lucrative gold mines, especially in Darfur, operating under Al-Junaid, the family company led by his brother Abdel Rahim Dagalo, a deputy leader of the RSF. His brother Abdurrahim Dagalo ran companies that took concessions, manned checkpoints, and forced artisanal miners to sell at a discount. Every truck of ore, every sack of dust that left Darfur was taxed by RSF men with guns, feeding the RSF's cash reserve. The result? A river of gold flowing out of Sudan. And where did it end up? Dubai. Investigation by Reuters and Global Witness shows that as much as 70% of Sudan gold never appears on the state books. It was smuggled out, often through Chad or Kenya, and sold in Dubai souks. Fast, anonymous, liquid. That was Hemeti's bank. But gold was only the foundation. Hemeti also learned how to monetize his soldiers. When Saudi Arabia and the UAE needed fighters in Yemen, they called on the RSF. Plane load of Sudanese fighters were shipped to the Gulf. Their salaries were paid not to the Sudanese treasury, but into the RSF coffers. Hard currency, Gulf goodwills, political credit. This is where the patrons appear: Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and later even Moscow. The UAE poured billions into Sudanese ports and infrastructure projects, many of them tied back to the RSF influence. Russia's Wagner Group, according to the Western diplomat, struck deals in mining and provided cover in exchange for a cut of the gold trade. And then came the weapons. For every gold bar that left Darfur, a new Toyota pickup rolled in. Some came looted from the Sudanese army stores, others purchased on open market through shadowy brokers. Libya's chaos became a supply chain. Chad, the transit point; Dubai, the paid masters. Soon, Hemeti's fighters weren't Ragtag militias on horses. They were desert army with technical drones, anti-air system, kits you don't buy without serious cash. And when the international community tries to close the tap, when the US sanctions Hemeti, his brother Abdurrahim, and their company, that didn't kill the trade. It made it more profitable. Sanctions raised the price of secrecy. Every shipment became riskier and therefore more expensive. But the RSF controlled the smuggling routes, the refiners, the checkpoint. They captured the black market premium. What was meant to starve them ended up feeding them. This is how a militia became a state. The RSF controlled not just territories, but payrolls, supply chains, international patrons. They had their own treasury, their own foreign policy, even their own war economy. Sudan wasn't one country anymore, it was two. The formal state under General Burhan and the shadow state under Hemeti. So when you see the RSF fighters roll into Khartoum, you are not looking at a ragtag insurgency. You are looking at the product of an economy built on gold, on Gulf contract, on Russian deals, on sanctions loopholes, and on the ruthless efficiency of checkpoints in the desert. Meanwhile, Burhan wasn't standing still. He courted Egypt. President al-Sisi saw him a partner who could keep Sudan in Cairo's orbit. Egypt provided diplomatic and possibly military support. Turkey entered the game too, supplying drones to the Sudanese army. On the battlefield, those drones gave Burhan's forces an edge against the RSF ground fighters. So, Sudan became a chessboard. On one side, Hemeti, funded by gold smuggling, Gulf cash, and Russian connections. On the other, Burhan, backed by Egypt and Turkish drones. Both sides claiming to represent Sudan, both sides surviving only because money and foreign sponsors keep them afloat. Each shows that behind the slogan of salvation or stability, the real activity is economic. Who controls gold? Who trades fuels? Who secures new deals? So far, we have seen how Sudan's story unfolded. A dictator, a warlord, a general, and two coups that shattered the promise of a democracy. We have also traced how money and power stitched together Hemeti's rise into a state within a state. But Sudan is not an exception, it's a mirror. Next, we will step back and uncover the wider pattern that repeats across the region. Now that we have walked through Sudan's story, it's time to zoom out. Because what happened in Khartoum wasn't unique. The same choreography repeats itself in Mali, in Guinea, in Niger. And if you look closely, you see the same mechanism, almost like a checklist. So, what does the business model of a coup really looks like? Every coup begins with weapons. In Sudan, Hemeti's RSF had armored vehicles and heavy machine guns pouring through Libya and Chad, many of them rerouted from Gulf stockpiles. But Sudan is just one example. In Mali, after the Tuareg rebellion, arms from Gaddafi's looted depot in Libya flooded south. The UN later traced thousands of rifles and RPGs directly from Tripoli to Gao. In Niger, leaked EU documents show smugglers supplying small arms from Nigeria's black market to Moutinho's soldiers in Niamey. The pattern is clear. When the state arsenal is locked, the coup plotters shop elsewhere, and arms brokers always get paid. Once the shooting stops, the digging begins. Sudan had gold, Guinea had bauxite, Mali had gold again. Each resource became the war chest. When Colonel Doumbia ousted Alpha Conde in 2021, global aluminium price spiked nearly 20% in a week. Within months, Chinese companies signed fresh guarantees with the juntas to keep bauxite flowing, insulating the coup leaders with foreign cash. Or Mali, despite sanctions, gold exports still topped $6.5 billion in 2022, with most of it rerouted through the UAE. The commodity doesn't just fund the coup, it legitimizes it by tying foreign buyers to the new rulers. Here is where the quiet money moves. After Mali's second coup in 2021, French troops began to withdraw. Into the vacuum stepped Wagner Group. Leaked documents suggest Wagner financed its deployment by securing mining concessions in gold-rich areas. In Sudan, reports suggest Hemeti's company signed logistic and transport contracts with Emirati firms, creating a legitimate-looking pipeline for smuggled gold. The story repeats. A coup leader promised stability and foreign firms rush in to sign contracts. Security, mining, shipping. Each contract is less about rebuilding the state, more about carving it up. On paper, sanctions are meant to isolate coup regimes. In practice, they create black market premiums. When ECOWAS sanctioned Mali in 2022, the price of basic goods jumped 20 to 30% in Bamako markets. But who profited? Smugglers. Smugglers who could sneak in fuel, rice, and cash across porous borders from Algeria and Cote d'Ivoire. In Sudan, today dollar trade at nearly double the official rate, and Hemeti's men control many of the smuggling corridors through Darfur and into Chad. Sanctions don't just choke the war economy, they fatten it by rewarding those with control of the routes. Finally, control of states' choke points. In Sudan, Hemeti's men control custom ports on the borders, airstrips in Darfur, and at one point even the gold export pipeline. In Mali, Colonel Goita's junta seized not just ministries but the state phosphate company and fuel import licenses. In Guinea, Doumbouya's men stacked the board of bauxite and alumina firms with allies. This is the jackpot: ports, borders, state companies. Once you hold them, you don't just lead a junta, you run a business. Put together, the pattern repeats. Weapon from the shadows, resource captured, contract awarded, sanctions sidestepped, state choke points seized. Different countries, different years, same mechanism. The name changes: Hemeti in Sudan, Goita in Mali, Doumbouya in Guinea, but the ledger reads the same. And once you have seen the mechanisms, you realize a coup isn't just a political event, it's an economic model, one that treats money for few while dismantling the state for everyone. The question is, what happens to the millions of ordinary citizens caught inside this system? Next, we will turn to the consequences, not just who profits, but what happens long-term to a state and citizens. We will also test a counter-argument. Some say coup can clear out corrupt elite and create stability. Is there any evidence for that claim, or does the ledger tell a different story? What the doors of a coup settles. The television images tend to focus on generals waving from balcony or jubilant crowd in the city squares. But the deeper consequences are measured elsewhere, in the balance sheets, international deals, and the daily life of ordinary people. First, the political map shifts. Foreign partners recalibrate alliance. France, once a dominant power in West Africa, finds its military bases pushed out after successive coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Russia, through Wagner and other networks, seized the opening to expand influence. The result isn't just new flags over embassies, it's new channels of money, weapons, and contracts flowing into the regions. Every change of regime redraws the investment maps. Second, there's the economic fallout. Sanctions often cripple banking system, shutting down dollar flow and leaving local businesses stranded. In Mali, regional sanctions in 2022 froze trade and caused basic goods to spike by over 20% in weeks. In Niger, ECOWAS blockade led to food shortages in landlocked towns. Yet, while civilians bore the brunt, smugglers and black market operators thrived. They controlled scarce fuels, imported goods, even staple grain. In effect, sanctions acted less like punishment for juntas and more like subsidies for shadow economies. Third, coup alters the security landscape. International counter-terrorism operation often stalls, leaving rural population vulnerable. But this insecurity also justifies new contracts for private security firms, armed dealers, and international partners. For example, Burkina Faso break with France created demand for alternative military suppliers, filling the gap with Russia's arms and regional militias. What looks like instability at village level for some actors a profitable marketing expansion. But perhaps the most overlooked consequence is psychological and generational. In many African states, the younger population is experiencing coup not as a distant history but as a lived reality. A Malian teenager today has seen 3 governments fail in less than a decade. In Guinea, students watch their president overthrown while still in secondary school. For them, politics doesn't look like a context of policies or elections. It looks like a cycle of force and survival. This normalizes instability and lowers the perceived cost of future coups. So, what changes? On surface, leaders rotate, new slogans appear, constitutions are rewritten, but underneath, the same economic logic continues. Resources shift hands, markets reprice, and external powers adjust their positions. For the majority, daily struggles remain. For the minority contractors, commodity traders, smugglers, and foreign patrons, the opportunity multiply. And this raises an uncomfortable question. Are coups a failure of democracy, or have they quietly become a functioning business model in their own right? A model where the chaos isn't an accident but a feature, creating constant churn, which ensures that the network who knows how to play it always walk away richer. Some say a coup, while bloody, can reset a political order. The logic goes like this. When civilian leaders are corrupt and elections are a sham, a coup clears the slate. With generals in charge, discipline returns, and foreign partners eventually adjust, creating a pathway back to stability. But here's what the data shows. In decades after coup, the average country in Africa experiences lower GDP growth and higher inflations compared to its pre-coup trajectory. Investors don't just rush back, they stay away. And the so-called discipline of generals often just funnels money into narrower patronage network. If coup truly created stability, we should see stronger economies in the years that follows. Instead, we see the opposite. We have seen that coup don't just change government, they rewrite economies, and usually at the expense of ordinary people. The promise of stability rarely hold up to the evidence, and the idea that sanctions protect democracy often collapse under scrutiny. But that leaves us with the haunting question. If everyone knows who profits, why does the cycle keep repeating itself? So, maybe the real story of a coup isn't just about generals and speeches. It's about market, deals, and who cashes out when the system breaks. Ordinary people pay the highest price, yet the same cycle keeps repeating. Asset reallocation, alliances reshuffled, contract resigned, which leaves us with a question. If instability constantly enriches certain actors, is there really an incentive to stop it? Or are we looking at a self-sustaining loop where chaos itself is the commodity?